park to the same little time lab in East Hanover. And they said, okay, Andy, how do you feel now? Will you go? It seemed important to them that I go. Something needed to be fulfilled in the past. And I said, sure, Dr. Colgate, I'll go. I mean, my dad clearly wants me to go, and I think I can handle it, so I'll go. So my dad then took me over to a drafting table where there was a mimeograph, as we used to call them at that time, of Gettysburg in 1863. And he grabbed a number 2 pencil, and he showed me the farmland north of Gettysburg, where Washington Street went north and then went on a 45-degree angle to the northwest, north by northwest, where, let's say, Gettysburg College would be today. And he said, we don't want anybody to see you suddenly popping into view because, this is a settled town. It's not a battlefield. It's not the hodgepodge of buildings in Santa Fe. So perhaps a townsperson could see you suddenly pop into view, and we're concerned, for example, if that would cause you to be arrested. So after all, son, the Battle of Gettysburg happened just 4 months before Lincoln's speech on November 19th. It happened on July 1st, 2nd, and 3rd. So we want to kind of conceal your arrival. So we're going to put you down on the side of this road right here. And he marked a little check on the left side of that northern or northwestern pike that heads from, even to this day, it kind of terminates in Gettysburg College, but that went up to the north by northwest from the top of Washington Street. I would learn during my recent visit last October that Gettysburg is a crossroads town, so all of its streets are named for the town on the East Coast that it points to. Baltimore Street, Washington Street, Emmitsburg Pike, and so forth. He said, what we want you to do is just start walking in either direction, and there's only 2 ways you can go. So once you run into somebody, yell, hey, friend, which way Gettysburg? And you'll find out whether you're walking in the right direction or you're going to have to turn 180 degrees and start walking in the opposite direction. And then he said, but we want you to not only be sent there in a way where your appearance will be concealed, we also want to dress you up in some period clothing. So then Valerie walked up to me. He said, so Valerie here will help you get outfitted as a Union bugle boy to be sent to the Gettysburg address site. So Valerie took me into a room that was as well equipped as any Hollywood studio. There must have been about 150 different types of children's garments in the room. Wow. And she looked at my chart and she said, okay, Andy, we're gonna dress you as a Union bugle boy because you're 10, and that was frequently the age of Union bugle boys during the Civil War. In fact, it was the average age. And some of them even were killed in battle and wounded in battle because of, being on the battlefield. And the purpose here is not, we can't teach you to play the trumpet because I see in your chart that you're an alto saxophonist. So I'm not going to be equipping you with a bugle because you might be asked to play it. So we're just going to give you the garments, just the wardrobe of a Union bugle boy. So she gave me this beautiful hat and this beautiful new dark blue jersey shirt that kind of went over my belt level, and then these pantaloon pants and these spanking brand new black shoes. And so when I came out of the dressing room, I went up to my dad and I kind of went ta-da like I would, at Robert Hall's after I had gotten a new suit or something. I mean, I really was dressed really smart. It was a new uniform. So he then took me to the plasma confinement chamber and explained how it was going to work. And once we were past a blue line inside the chamber, which was a lucite chamber, maybe about 10 feet high and maybe as wide and long as half of the side of a regulation tennis court.
Hey, what's lucite?
He said, once you're past that line, Andrew, and you're in the plasma, you're going to feel a trapdoor sensation, and then you're going to violently wormhole to Gettysburg in the farmland north of town. So when you start walking, ask somebody the question, and then make a right, because that'll put you on Washington Street south, because we're putting you down in the northern side of town. So he said, when you get to this sharp turn, which in fact was the terminus of Emmitsburg Pike between Washington Street on the west, which I was walking south on, and then Baltimore Street over on the east side of town, which Lincoln would be traveling down south to the speech site. He said, make a sharp turn here because we've seen from the Chronovision that somebody takes you in the store there and gives you some assistance. So make sure to make that sharp left when you get to Emmitsburg. So that's what I did. I violently wormholed and into town. It was farmland, except I had lost my Bugle Boy hat, both of my shoes, and one of my socks. So I was kind of feverish with heat as I arrived there through the violent wormholing. I could smell ozone. That might be a clue for electrical engineers to figure out how they were sending me there via plasma confinement. I could smell a whiff of ozone. And then I realized I was missing just one sock, and I was otherwise barefoot. So I sat down on the ground, and I took off my remaining sock, and I threw it in the bush. And then I proceeded to walk into town barefoot for about 40 minutes. So that might be a gauge of how far a 10-year-old human boy would travel on foot, in fact, barefoot, on a well-trammeled dirt road. In fact, the dirt felt kind of cool to my feet because it was very well-trammeled. There were no stones. It was almost a road that had been paved. And by the time I got to downtown Gettysburg, which was really nothing to really be impressed by, it was just a set of shops, 2 or 3 attached to a common wooden sidewalk, and then there were gaps between the sidewalk. I was so cold in the brisk morning air of November 19th, 1863, that my teeth were chattering uncontrollably. I was up on the wooden sidewalk looking into the front window of what was called a millinery shop, which in Civil War times was a men's accessory shop with hats, gloves, ties, tie pins, walking sticks, and shoes, both old and new. When this crotchety old man that I've described, and in fact I described him in many ways before I identified who he was, limping. He was I've said he was about 70 years old. I said he had kind of like, he looked like maybe Robert F. Kennedy may have looked at around 70 with a sort of a more wizened expression and the wrinkles of a 70-year-old on his face. And he was hobbling, I had said, from a recent gunshot wound above the right hip. And he yelled to me as he ambled onto the wooden sidewalk, walking towards the millinery shop and me standing there. He said, boy, what are you doing out here in the cold morning air without a hat, without a jacket, son, without even any shoes? Listen, you're going to catch your grip. Let me take you inside, and I'll get you some warm clothing. I'll get you some shoes. And he took a skeleton key out of his right pocket and gained access to the millinery shop. So we figured he must have been somebody connected to the shop.
Let me ask you a question.
Me too.
What
Sure.
was his dialogue? What kind of, did he have an accent? Did he say terms differently than how you're used to hearing it? You know, because you're talking about 100 years.
Yeah. I had visited rural Pennsylvania a lot because my father was born in Summit Hill, Pennsylvania, in a small town in the eastern Pennsylvania anthracite coal country. He was from a coal mining family. In fact, he began coal mining when he was 4, at least going down to the mine and getting small pieces of coal from my grandmother's Franklin stove. And I was familiar with that sort of that Atlantic seaboard accent that has a touch of Pennsylvania Dutch in it. It almost sounds a little like the modern Canadian dialect, like there's an expression in the Pennsylvania Dutch dialect when somebody tells you something, they go, did he now? Did you know? Oh, you did that? Oh, did you know? There's kind of a little bit of a sing-song lilt in it. He had a little bit of that. It was sort of like, boy, what are you doing out here in the cold morning air, son? It kind of had a sing-songy quality that I associate with being distinctively eastern Pennsylvania, and rural. But he was also using words that were not part of our modern lexicon. For example, he didn't say, you're going to catch a cold out here in the brisk morning air. He said, you're going to catch your grip, by which I think that would have been slang for like catching a flu or cold.
Right.
And if I can go back just a little bit, you said that
Sure.
they knew the layout from Chronovision before. Does that mean they looked without sending people, or had people reported? I mean, where did they get the information to give you the map?
Right. Well, when they set up the hologram, which they could do either inside of a small area or on the large area of a stage, Chronovision gave them the ability to reconnoiter the places they were sending us and the times. What I call I've made up a term, time-place. When you're relocated in time space, when you're time traveling, you're basically being sent to a new or a different time place. So they were able to reconnoiter the time places because they knew where they were sending us, and they could calibrate where in space and time they were going to be sending us. So what they meant is, before using plasma confinement to physically send me to the Lincoln speech site, where he delivered the Gettysburg Address on November 19 of 1863, they reviewed my trip there. Because they were always able to use Chronovision non-locally to look at a time place and see what happened there. And that was part of the safety element of sending children via a temporary means like plasma confinement, is they could sort of gauge what scenario was going to happen. So the man who helped me, and I'm basically kind of giving you the prescript before I reveal what I found in my investigation, and especially my trip to Gettysburg in October of last year, which was my first time there in 150 years. I was telling everybody, hey, you're celebrating the sesquicentennial, which is a 150-year anniversary of the battle here in July of 1863. And now pretty soon you'll be celebrating President Lincoln's speech here on November 19th of that year, 150 years ago. But this, for me, is also the sesquicentennial of my first visit here, because I was sent here by the Defense Advanced Research Projects Agency in a program based at the Los Alamos National Labs under Dr. Harold M. Agnew, when he was the director of the labs, one of the Manhattan Project physicists when I was a child in Project Pegasus. So I was regaling everybody I was running into about the fact it was also my sesquicentennial in Gettysburg. But the day that I was sent there, that man, who apparently was, the cobbler for that shop, equipped me in a hat, a Union winter park. It was like a size medium adult men's cloth winter coat, and not socks, but these grossly oversized men's civilian shoes. They were about a size 14 brown street shoe that he spent some time stuffing packing paper into the front of the shoes and equipped my feet with them, and then put the jacket on me, and then said, well, that's the best I can do, son. The President of the United States is going to be here today, and I've got a speech to go to. So I shuffled after that man, and I followed him diagonally out to what would now be the corner of the upper part of Emmitsburg Pike, which I think is now called something different. It's like Ehrenberg Road or something like that. And the terminus of Washington Street, where I'd walk south, not just into town, but through town, to where the cemeteries begin in the southern part of Gettysburg. And I followed him down.
Can I ask you a quick question?
Sure.
Your clothing was made in, 19 whatever. What year did you go back from? 72.
72. Yeah, it was new clothing in 72. It was new. Made up.
And you're going back then, did this cobbler notice that your clothes were different and they were new instead of being the same material as what would have been back in the 1860s?
No, I mean, the whole Union Army had been there, and there would obviously be stragglers from the different regiments that were there. Not the whole Union Army, but, I mean, there were 50,000 casualties at Gettysburg. It was the largest land battle in the history, even to this day, in terms of number of men killed and wounded, of any other battle in the Western Hemisphere. So he didn't question my clothing, but in fact it was spanking brand new. I mean, my shoes were shiny, but I'd lost my shoes. But certainly the muslin sort of jersey, the shiny Union blue jersey I was wearing would have struck him as one that wasn't covered with mud or blood or any of the other things, as if I had been in the thick of the battle back in July. So I guess he was just presuming that I was maybe a recently equipped or a non-involved Union, not a combat-involved Union bugle boy who had been in new clothes or clean clothes and then gotten lost and lost his shoes or whatever. But he didn't bring up the quality of my existing uniform when I got there. He just noticed that I didn't have a jacket on. It was November 19th. We're talking fairly cold in the eastern United States as Thanksgiving is approaching, sometimes even early snow on November 19th. And then,
are you far back from him?